back up.
Hello, this is Matthew here from the Nations of Sanity Project. I'm here hosting a debate on behalf of a project called Together Strong, which is about bringing people together for common cause. More specifically, this channel is about bringing libertarian thinkers together to discuss and debate various aspects of libertarianism so we can get closer to the truth and refine our understanding of these principles. I'm very much looking forward to this debate between Walter Block and Stephan Kinsella, two absolute heavyweights of libertarian thinking. And the topic of the debate today is voluntary slavery. Is it a legitimate thing that people can enter into and be held to? Stephan says no. Walter says yes. I'll let them elaborate on their positions. Before we kick off, I just want to say thank you again to Walter and Stephan for taking the time to do this debate. I very much appreciate it. I'm going to hand it over to Stephan to kick things off. Just before we do kick off, I just want to say that I do think this is an excellent way for libertarians to move forward. I think we need to discuss and debate ideas. Where we agree, we should discuss and explore, and where we disagree, we should discuss and explore, because I think that's how we get a better understanding of the principles. So thank you again, Walter and Stephan, for doing this. And Stephan, I'll leave it to you to introduce your side of the argument.
Sure. Hi. Hi, Walter. It's Stephan Kinsella. Nice to meet you. We've never met before, have we? It's a joke. Walter and I know each other for a long time. In fact, we've discussed this topic before in my living room, and I guess in print a little bit. Let me try to, and I'll try to spend no more than maybe 10 minutes on this. The issue is, I guess the issue is whether contracts to sell yourself into slavery are legitimately or legally enforceable, or ought to be legally enforceable under a libertarian society that respects libertarian property rights and libertarian rights, and therefore libertarian contracts. Okay, I say no, and I think most libertarians would say no. I don't know if they can all articulate why. I would say Rothbard has a reason, and my reason is similar to his, and I think it's compatible with, say, the view of rights of Hoppe. Now, I do think there's a contradiction in some of Rothbard's own writings, where part of his reasoning goes against or is for inalienability, which is the view that you cannot sell your body into slavery. But other comments he says in his contract theory indicate otherwise. And I think that's what Walter seizes on that part and goes down that direction. So, and Walter can clarify, but I believe Walter's view is that to be fully consistent, Rothbard ought to abandon his view that rights cannot be alienated by contract, and take his view that all rights can be alienated. And I'm aware of Walter's argument, which is basically, if you don't let people sell themselves into slavery, you could imagine situations where a bad result would happen, where, you know, a guy can only save his son's life by agreeing to be someone's slave, a rich guy's slave, and the rich guy's only going to pay to save his son if the guy agrees to be a slave, but he's not going to pay him to do that if the legal system would not enforce the promise to be a slave. And so therefore, if the legal system doesn't enforce that, then the guy won't be able to make the contract, and he won't be able to save his son's life. I don't see how that's really an argument, though. It's just pointing out what would happen if people are not entitled to sell themselves into slavery. It doesn't say that whether they are entitled to sell themselves into slavery. You could argue, for example, and I'm going to get to my main argument in a second, but you could argue that someone who is a hostage of a bad guy, and the bad guy wants to release him, but the bad guy's afraid that the kidnap victim will reveal who the kidnapper was. And so the guy wants to say, listen, if you let me go, I promise you I will never reveal to anyone who you were. But the kidnapper knows that that's not going to happen, so he has to shoot the guy. It's just the way the situation is. There's nothing the law could do about that. In any case, my argument is this. We have to first understand what contracts are, what it means for there to be a binding contract, and what rights are. And I'm not going to go into the details of libertarian rights, because I assume Walter and I agree on the foundations. And I think the foundation is this. all rights, as Rothbard points out, are property rights. That's what rights are. They're property rights. And a property right just is the right to control a scarce resource. It's actually not the right to control it. It's the right to exclude other people from controlling it. But that's a subtle distinction that we don't need to get into here. I do discuss this in chapter, I think, 11 of my book, which is, my book is Legal Foundations of a Free Society. It came out last year, and it discusses a lot of the issues I'm going to mention here. And so what are rights? The rights basically are those summarized or codified in the non-aggression principle. The non-aggression principle is not a foundational principle. It's more of a summary or a shorthand. It simply says people don't have the right to initiate force. Okay, now that's too compressed. What it means is, in the case of your body, no one can hit your body or use it without your permission, because you're the self-owner, because you're the owner of your body. So in other words, when you say I'm opposed to aggression, or when you recite the non-aggression principle, that's just another way of saying that everyone is the owner of their body, or the presumptive or the initial owner of their body, right? So non-aggression in the case of people's bodies means that they own their bodies, and that other people are not entitled to invade the borders of those bodies or use them without the permission of the occupant or the owner. Okay, so that's the first rule of libertarianism of property rights, which is every person is the initial or presumptive owner of property rights in their own body. I don't think so far Walter would disagree with me, because I did say initial or presumptive. Now, I do believe that you can lose your rights. You can forfeit or lose your rights by committing an act of aggression. And that is precisely because when someone responds to you, if you commit aggression against their body and they respond, the force that they're using is not initiatory force, it's responsive force. It's force in response to the act of aggression by the other actor. That's why it's permissible. And another way of looking at that is that the person who's committing the act of aggression has, to an extent, alienated or given up some of his rights by his action, by the consequences of his actions. Okay, so rights can be lost or forfeited by committing an act of aggression. Okay, that's important to keep in mind. Now, there are other rights other than our self-ownership rights or our rights in our bodies, and that is rights in external things that we come to own, things that were inanimate things, or even animate in the case of animals, but external resources that are scarce resources. Again, everything's about scarce resources. All property rights are rights to scarce resources. That is things that could be the means of action and things over which there could be conflict, right? That's the whole purpose of property rights, is to allocate an owner of a resource so that conflict can be avoided. Okay, so in the case of the body, it's the first occupant or owner of the body. And the reason that you're the owner of your body is because you have a special connection to your body, and that is your direct control of your body. Or as Rothbard calls it, your will. Your will is inalienable. Even if you make a contract, you still are the one controlling your body directly. Or as Hoppe points out, the only way to own someone else's body is always necessarily indirectly. You can't directly control their body. You can only coerce them into doing what you want, like a slave would be threatened with whips or punishment or something like that. Okay. In the case of unowned external resources that are first unowned, we come to use them because someone first starts using them before they were owned. So that means the very first type of ownership right in a non-body thing is based upon homesteading or original appropriation. That's the first user of this resource is the owner. And then the second rule would be, or if you acquire it from a previous owner by contract, right? So these are the three basic manifestations, and there's a third which is about torts. If you commit aggression or a tort against someone, then you owe them some restitution, which means you would have to give them some of your property to pay them. So that's another way that your property rights could be lost. But you can think of that as a subset of contract. It's basically something you do where you transfer ownership of your owned property to someone else. That's what contracts are. Contracts are just a manifestation of an owner over his resource, and it's a manifestation of his permission or his lack or his withholding of permission. So, for example, in the case of your body, a girl on a date can say she can grant permission to her date to kiss her, and that's not molestation or assault and battery or rape or anything. She's consenting to it. because she consents. That's the whole thing. If she doesn't consent, then it's an assault. Likewise, if I hand you my watch and I let you use it, that's a temporary loan of my property because I'm consenting to you using it. If you take it from me without my permission, then that's an act of theft or trespass because I didn't consent. So being an owner of a resource means you have the right to consent or to not consent to other people using those things. In the case of a resource that you acquire that was previously unowned, you came to own it by acquiring it from the state of nature and just asserting your dominion over it. You occupied it or you transformed it. You mixed your labor with it according to law, something like that. You did something to be the first user and you show the world, I'm the owner of this thing. Okay, that's why you're the owner. But by the same token, you can cease to be the owner of these things. That is, you can abandon them. So if I pick up a stick and I use it for a couple of days and then I just abandon it back in the woods, I've given up ownership, and then someone else can come along and they can re-homestead it, right? Or I could do it directly. I could hand it to Walter and I could loan him my stick, in which case I still own it, and he has to return it to me when the loan period is up. In which case, and that's because possession and ownership are distinct. I could have ownership of a stick and the possession of it. I can let Walter use it for a while. He can borrow my car for a while, but I still own it. Or I could loan him the car in effect forever by abandoning the car in favor of Walter. That is, I relinquish my title, but instead of leaving the car in the woods or in the middle of nowhere unowned, where someone else could re-homestead it, I actually give it to Walter first. And then I say, okay, Walter, you have my car. You're using it with my permission. I now hereby abandon the car. Then I am no longer the owner, and Walter is now magically the owner because he's in possession of the car and he claims ownership of it, and he's the new homesteader of the car. This is why the owner of a resource has the ability to use his capacity and his right to say yes or no, to give consent or not consent, to transfer title of a resource to someone else in the case of a resource that was previously unowned. Something that I acquire, I can unacquire. Something that was not mine, that becomes mine by homesteading or by contract, can be abandoned by me and thus given to someone else. That's the mechanism of such transfers. This doesn't work in the case of the body because in the case of the body, you never homesteaded your body. So it's not like you own your body because you homesteaded it and then you can abandon it. You simply don't have the ability to abandon your body because the fact is that you're still the direct controller of your body even after you make a promise. As Rothbard says, you still have the will that allows you to control your body. And if I give Walter my car and I relinquish a title to it, now he's the owner of that car. If I try to take that car back, I'm committing theft against him because he owns the car now. However, if I promise to be Walter's slave, and he starts treating me like a slave, and I'm picking cotton for him, he's paying me, but after a couple of days, I get tired of it, and I decide to change my mind, and I run off. Then the question is, can he use force to stop me? And according to Walter, he can, because I have conveyed title to my body to him, and now he owns my body. And so if I try to run off, I'm stealing the body that he owns. In my view, he can't use force against me precisely because of the initial rule that started all this, which is the non-aggression principle, which is that you can only use force against someone if they've committed aggression. And I did not commit aggression against Walter. Now, Walter's going to use a circular argument, I think, or he sneaks up. He's going to say, yes, you committed aggression because you're stealing my property. But that's question begging, because the question is, why is my body your property? You can't just say, because you promised. In fact, in the title transfer theory of contract, promises are not binding, and I think Walter is supposed to agree with that. And if we go back to the girlfriend example, and then I'll stop. If a girl goes on a date, or let's say she's a longtime girlfriend of a guy, and he's used to kissing her at the end of the evening after dinner, he doesn't have to get her permission to kiss her on the cheek every time, because she sort of has set up a standing order or a standing expectation that, yeah, unless I tell you no, you know that I don't mind if you give me a kiss on the cheek every now and then, right? So when he kisses her on the cheek, as is their custom, he's doing it with her presumed or implied consent. It doesn't mean she can't change her mind, though. In fact, there's nothing in libertarianism that says you can't change your mind. And even if the girl says, hey, at the end of dinner tonight, when you walk me to the front porch, I'm going to let you give me a nice long kiss. And so the guy goes to dinner with her. He buys her a nice dinner. At the end of the dinner, she really has a change of heart. She goes, no, I changed my mind. I don't want to kiss. Now, if the guy grabs her and kisses her anyway and says, well, you consented an hour ago, that would still be assault and battery because the consent has been overridden by the most recent communication. The most recent communication is the one that matters. Likewise, in the case of the slavery, if I say, no, I decide I'm not going to be your slave anymore, I can change my mind. And the only question is, did it violate the slave owner's rights for me to do that? And I say no, because I didn't commit an act of aggression against him. And that's the only way that he's justified in using force against my body.
Okay, it's great. Excellent argument, Stephan. Lots of food for thought. Walter, your turn.
Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to debate Stephan Kinsella. I regard him as one of the leading theoreticians of libertarianism. In particular, I'm a big fan of his and follower. He is my mentor on all matters IP, intellectual property. And it's wonderful to be debating with Stephan on this. In case there are non-libertarians, let me tell you a little story. I was interviewed by the New York Times on libertarianism, and they just weren't getting it. So I resorted to the A-bomb, voluntary slavery. And you know what these rascals did? They quoted me as favoring actual slavery. So for the non-libertarians listening to this, and I'm sure Stephan will agree with me here, we are not talking about actual slavery. Actual slavery is an abomination. Actual slavery, perhaps second to mass murder, is the worst possible thing, the violation of libertarianism. The president of my university wrote a blistering essay saying, well, we're not against, we're against slavery, Block isn't. I tell you, if I were the president of the university and one of my professors was quoted in the New York Times as favoring actual slavery, I'd call him in my office and say, please tell me you were misquoted. But that didn't happen. So for libertarians who are in the know, everyone knows, and certainly Stephan and I agree, that we're not talking about actual slavery, we're talking about voluntary slavery, which is very different. Stephan is also correct in saying that his view is the majority among libertarians. The only libertarians that I know, and there might be one or two others, are me and Robert Nozick, who favor the voluntary slavery contract. We don't favor voluntary slavery. We just think that a voluntary slavery contract is a legitimate contract. But pretty much every other libertarian would disagree, and I just think they're all wrong. An interesting part is, if you can't sell yourself, can you sell body parts? And here I think Stephan would agree. He'll have to say whether he does or not, that I can sell my liver, my kidney, my blood, one of my lungs, whatever. I can alienate that, but somehow I can't sell myself, and I don't see the difference. He says he did run over what I regard as the most dramatic case in favor of voluntary slavery contracts. And that is, by the way, Stephan and I both have sons that we love. And let's take me as a case. My son, God forbid, has a dread disease, and it'll cost $50 million to save him. And I don't have anything like $50 million, but I love him very much. And I value his life more than my freedom. So I go to Bill Gates, who's a very rich guy, and he wants me to be his slave. And I pick cotton for him, and I don't know, teach him economics or whatever. And he gives my son's doctors the $50 million. And now I go to his plantation. And Stephan is quite right that unless the contract is valid, Bill Gates isn't going to cough up $50 million, because he wouldn't get me as a slave, because as soon as I get to the plantation and he starts whipping me and I say, well, I changed my mind. I mean, if I sold him my car for $20,000, I couldn't change my mind. What's this changing mind nonsense? I mean, a contract is a contract. It's not a promise. I'm alienating. What is the word? I'm giving up my car, and I can't change my mind. And now I'm giving up myself, and all of a sudden I can change my mind. What kind of contract is that? It's not a promise. It's a release. And he mentions kidnapping, and I didn't get the relevance of that. How do we analyze what just happened when I made this contract with Bill Gates? Why did I gain? I gained because I value my son's life more than my freedom. He gained because he values my servitude more than the 50 million. As with all good Austrians, we know that every voluntary trade is mutually beneficial, at least in the ex ante sense. Maybe not ex post, but usually, but necessarily ex ante. So we both gain. Now, look, libertarianism is supposed to be a thing that brings about prosperity and human happiness. My son is going to die if Stephan's view is upheld, because it's seen as an involuntary contract. It seems to me that the burden of proof is on Stephan. He talks about my circular arguments. I don't see any circular arguments. I think the burden of proof is every contract is a valid contract unless there's fraud, and there's no fraud here. Why can't I sell myself? I own myself. If I don't own myself, I can't sell myself. There was this wonderful case, Norman Malcolm, a famous philosopher, and his teacher, Ludwig Wittgenstein, another famous philosopher. And the two of them are walking down the street, and Wittgenstein tells Norman Malcolm that he's going to give him all these trees, provided that he doesn't tell the previous owner what to do, and he doesn't interfere, and he doesn't do anything that the previous owners don't want. Well, the point is, if you can't do that, you don't really own the trees. If I can't sell myself, I don't own myself. Part of owning myself is the ability to sell myself. And Stephan is saying that I can't sell myself. And if I can't sell myself, I'm not really the owner of myself. And yet he contradicts himself, because he readily admits that we all do own ourselves. And that's how we get to own property and homestead other property, because we own ourselves. It seems that a criminal can alienate himself, but I can't alienate myself. I'm better than a criminal. A criminal can alienate his ownership over himself if he's properly executed or put in jail, which is kidnapping for an honest person. So somehow Stephan's view is that criminals can alienate themselves, and I can't. Why can't I? I didn't do anything wrong. Why am I being treated worse than a criminal? Now he talks about the will. I say will schmill. I don't care about the will. Yeah, of course he's right about the will. Only each person can directly influence his body. I'm not interested in the will. Will schmill. The question is, when Bill Gates starts whipping me, is he creating violence? Is he committing a criminal act? And I say no. And Stephan says, well, I'm engaging in a circular argument. I'm assuming the very thing in question. Well, of course I'm assuming the very thing in question, because it shouldn't be in question, because he's already agreed that I own myself. Well, if I own myself, I should be able to sell myself. Now he says you can abandon or sell or gamble away a stick. I can't gamble myself away, lose myself in a bet. I can't sell myself. I just don't understand. And I'm not promising anything. Now, Stephan keeps prevaricating between promise and conveying title. I am conveying title to myself when I sell myself, when I got that $50 million. Here's another case that Stephan and I disagree on. I'm a tightrope walker. I walk on a tightrope, and I have a stick to sort of balance myself. And I hire Stephan to hold the net under me. And in the middle of my performance, when I'm 100 feet up in the air, Stephan decides to quit. And I say, whoa, you can't quit. Namely, I want specific performance contracts. And voluntary slavery is one instance of a specific performance contract. So here, Stephan and I again disagree. I think that I have every right to shoot Stephan if he walks off the thing because he is endangering my life. He's no longer holding the net. He might kill me. He is engaging in violent threat against my life, and the libertarian non-aggression principle precludes not only invasions but threats of invasions, and he's threatening me. Here's another case. My wife and I are having difficulty having a baby, and I get my sperm and I put it in a test tube or something, and I give it to the host mother, and now the host mother has got our baby. It's my wife and I, our sperm and our egg, and we place it in the host mother. Now, ordinarily, I favor evictionism, where a pregnant woman can evict but not kill. So I'm neither pro-life nor pro-choice. But I made a contract with her, and she can't change her mind because she's conveyed the rights to her body in a limited sense of being pregnant. So yes, Stephan is when I try to escape from Bill Gates' plantation, I committed aggression. If I stole his horse, that would be horse thievery. If I stole a cow, that would be cattle rustling. I'm stealing me, so I'm rustling me. I don't like to brag, but I'm a very important possession of his. I'm valuable more than a horse or a cow. I'm worth 50 million, and I'm running away with myself. Who the hell am I? And when he stops and he starts whipping me or shooting me or whatever he does, Stephan's going to put him in jail. Stephan is putting the wrong person in jail. I should be the person put in jail, or I'm the person who's violating property rights because I no longer own myself. I sold myself to him.
Is that the finish of your introduction, Walter? Okay, well, those were both excellent arguments. So I'm going to basically let you two kind of free fall from now on. So I think you've both given really good arguments and a lot of food for thought for anyone listening. So I'll hand over to Stephan. Then from here on, I'll just let you two back and forth as you will. I might interject with some questions later, but otherwise I'm going to basically let you two kind of go through it. So Stephan, over to you.
Okay, so let me maybe respond to some of Walter's points, and then Walter, you can respond to them as you see fit. Okay, just to be precise, I think we libertarians, even people like me who oppose voluntary slavery, we don't oppose all involuntary slavery. We just oppose all unjustified involuntary slavery. So if you imprison someone for committing an act of aggression, they're your slave to an extent, but they deserve it. Now you're a little bit mystified, and the same thing with the word coercion. Coercion is used as a synonym by libertarians sometimes as for aggression, but coercion just means using the threat of force to compel someone to do something, and that could be justified or unjustified. It just depends upon the circumstances. Same reason that libertarians don't oppose violence or force, we oppose the initiation of those things. You're a little bit mystified that a criminal has the right to sell himself into slavery by committing an act of aggression, but we don't. But that's simply another way of stating the non-aggression principle, which is that you can only use force against people if they've committed force against you. That's why you can use force against a criminal. That's why he effectively sold himself to you, or he alienated his rights, is because he gave up his rights to self-defense by committing an act of aggression. It doesn't mean he's better than you, it means he's worse than you. But if I mouth the words to you, I promise to be your slave, that's not committing aggression against you. And if I change my mind, that is not committing aggression against you. Now you say it is because now I'm your property, but that's where the question begging comes in, because you're presupposing your conclusion, and that's because you think, and you said this explicitly, you think that if you're not able to sell something, you don't fully own it. But that means you're conceiving of ownership as having the ability to sell as part of it. But that's not what ownership per se means. Ownership simply means the one person who has the right to exclude others from using a resource. That's all ownership simpliciter means. It means the right to exclude. It doesn't actually mean the right to use even. And now and here's the reason. If I own a gun, you can say that I have the right to use it, but really what it means is no one else has the right to use it without my permission. The reason I don't have the right to use the gun is because it depends on how I use the gun. If I point the gun at your property and shoot it into your house, I've committed an act of aggression. I don't have the right to use the gun that way. So the ability to use a resource is not open-ended. It's the ability to, it's the right, it's the right to stop people from using it without your permission. You and I both agree that I can sell my car to you. So that's a case where we both agree. The reason, and that's why I tried to explain to you the difference between the source or the basis of rights in our bodies and the source and basis of our rights in other things. And this is what I'd like you to respond to when I stop my monologue here. I want you to explain to me if you agree or not with, say, Hoppe and me on this issue, and implicitly Rothbard, I believe. That is, there's a different basis for ownership of one's body and compared to the ownership, the basis of ownership of external things. The difference is this: we don't come to own our bodies because we homesteaded them. We have to understand that. It's an important point, and I want to find out if you agree with me. Because it's not like our bodies were unowned and floating out there, and we're like some spirit from the spirit realm, and we jumped into our bodies and started owning it and controlling it. At the time that we become rights bearers, whenever that is, late term, in the middle of pregnancy, when you're born, whenever we say that point is, this human being with rights is the owner of this body because of its identity with the body and its unique connection to that body, its direct control of the body. That is the source of rights to your body. And that's why someone else doesn't have the right to use your body, because you have a better claim to your body than they do. That's what self-ownership means. By contrast, when we walk around the world and we find unowned resources that have no owner and we start using these things, we take them into our own possession and then we become the owners of these things. And because of that way that we become the owner, we acquire these things. We can also abandon them. And when you abandon it, you lose ownership. That's why you can alienate this. You can acquire it, you can unacquire it. And yes, I can acquire it, I can give it to you as an act of will, as a contractual title transfer. And you and I both agree that that contractual title transfer works. It's sufficient to transfer title from me to you, right? Because I'm effectively abandoning my claim to it. And now, as far as the rest of the world is concerned, they have no connection to this thing. And if they fight you or me for this thing, they're going to have a worse claim than you or me. I originally had the better claim, but then I gave it to you. So now, as far as the rest of the world is concerned, between you and I, we have a better claim. But between me and you, we had a contract, and I gave you title. So now you have the better claim. This is how this works. The reason it doesn't work in the case of your body is I can't abandon my body by mouthing words, because I don't own it, because of an acquisition. There's no acquisition that I can undo. I just am the person that is my body, and I'm the controller of it. So I'd like you to maybe go wherever you want with this, but I'd like you to, one thing I will say before I finish though, your tightrope example is a good example, and I have a complicated explanation for that one, but I think it's a difficult one. I would concede that, but it doesn't establish a general case. You can have other examples like the airline pilot. Can he parachute out of the plane in the middle of the flight? That one's easier to solve with property rights. The tightrope walker is a different issue. I think it would take us way too far afield to go to that one, unless you want to. But other than that, I think that the question begging is because you're assuming that ownership implies the right to sell. But I think that's the debate. That's what you have to establish. You can't just assert it. You can't just say, well, I don't really own it if I can't sell it. That's what I'm trying to say. Ownership doesn't necessarily imply the right to sell. You have to show why it implies the right to sell. It's easy to see in the case of an acquired thing. You can sell it because you can unacquire it. Why is it the case in the case of your body? And do you agree that the basis for ownership rights in your body is different than ownership rights in acquired things?
Thanks for your contribution, Stephan. Let me try to respond. First, I'll respond directly to what you ask about how do you get to own yourself in the first place? And I've written maybe 5 articles on this, and I know you've written 1 or 2 because I cited you on that. And the puzzle is that we, all of us, consist of nothing more than the sperm and the egg of our parents and a little resources that our mother gave us, milk and whatever. So how the hell do we own ourselves? And I admit I don't know the answer. And just because I have a half-dozen articles published on this doesn't mean I know the answer. Lack of knowledge never stops me from publishing. And the reason I publish on this is because I'm hoping that this will trigger something in somebody else when they read this, because I think that publishing is sort of like a building situation. So even if we don't have the answer, we can still publish and give our thoughts and give the pros and the cons and hope that somebody else will pick it up and run with it. That's why I publish it, even though I sometimes don't have the answer. Most of the time, I think I have the answer. Now, so I try to answer your question by saying I don't know. I don't know how we get to own ourselves, given that.
Would you mind if I interrupt for a second? Would you mind if I interrupt and just ask you to clarify?
Sure, shoot.
I'm not asking you to give an argument for the theory of rights. I'm saying, do you agree? If you and I both agree as libertarians that you and I are self-owners, that is, we own our bodies. I'm not saying when it happens or exactly how, but do you simply agree that there's a distinction between the reason you own your body and the reason you own things that you acquire? Do you agree that a human being that homesteads an unowned thing in the world, he is already a self-owner, right? He never homesteaded his own body. His claim to ownership of his body has to be different than his claim to own a homesteaded thing. I'm simply asking if you agree with that distinction between the nature of ownership of our bodies and the nature of ownership of things that we come to acquire. That's all I was asking you there.
Oh yeah, sure. There's some difference in there. I mean, we wouldn't be having this dispute if there were no difference. I mean, we're not arguing whether you can own cars or sticks. We're arguing whether we can own ourselves. And the way I interpret you is saying we don't really own ourselves because we can't sell ourselves. And I regard selling ourselves as a necessary, not a sufficient, but a necessary condition of owning ourselves. And if you can't sell yourself, you don't fully own yourself. Now, you talk about force. Have I committed force against Bill Gates by running away? And my view is yes, because I stole his property, namely me. And you say, well, I'm engaging in a circular argument. And I return the favor. I think you're engaging in a circular argument, assuming the very thing in question the opposite way, namely that he's not the rightful owner. So I would sort of give us a tie on this. I don't see how either of us can prevail on that one. I have also suicide. Suicide is an abandonment of myself. I have a knife here. I knife my neck and I bleed out and I've committed suicide. I've abandoned myself. Now, according to you, I think this is another reductio ad absurdum, along with selling my son and that. I mean, a reductio ad absurdum is a very powerful argument. And I think it's absurd to say that it should be illegal to commit suicide. At one time, my understanding is in medieval days, if you committed suicide, this was a crime. And you know what the penalty for an attempt to commit suicide? The death penalty, which is a little weird. But I think a logical implication of your stance is that I have no right to commit suicide because I can't abandon myself. I can't sell myself. I can't gamble myself away. So I think that yes, there's a difference between how I own myself and how I own a stick or a car. But a stick or a car I can abandon, and now I can't abandon myself. And I return to the prisoner. He is able to abandon himself, and somehow I'm not. I regard that as another reductio ad absurdum. So I see a lot of reductios ad absurdum here. You don't. And I don't know how to really settle it, because
Let-
we've
let-
had this debate
Yeah, we-
before.
Yeah, we
And
have. Yeah, we have.
and I remember when we had that debate in your house, I put it to you, and let me do it to you again, because you have also a son who you love, and God forbid your son has the dread disease and it'll cost 50 million to save him, and you value his life more than your freedom, and Bill Gates is willing to give you 50 million to have you be his slave. How do you feel about your view that your son dies?
That's like that question that Dukakis was asked in the debate about how would you feel if your wife Kitty was raped, and he says, "Well, I'd be kind of upset about that." Remember, he lost the election because he was not emotional enough about it. I don't think that's how we decide what the legal system should be. Of course, in that situation, I would be upset that the legal system didn't recognize, wouldn't enforce my promise to be a slave. I would be upset about that, but I would be
It's not a promise. You keep using the word promise. It's a conveyance. You're conveying. You're not promising.
either way.
Look,
Either way,
when you sell your car to me, you're not promising to give me the car. You're giving me the car. And
correct.
what you're
But in
promising.
that case, you and I we both agree that I can transfer the title of the car to you. And the reason why I can't change my mind is I don't own it anymore.
Well,
In the case of my body, I'm still the controller of my body. I haven't changed anything. But let me go back to the organ thing really quickly. And the suicide issue. First of all, I've admitted in writing, I think in response to you, or maybe talking about your example of, I think, is it you that talks about zombicide? Like you could, or someone else maybe. The idea that you have to distinguish between law and fact and law. I have the factual ability to kill myself. That's not the question. The question is, do I have the right to transfer that power to someone else? Do I have the right to alienate that? That's a whole different issue. If the law criminalizes suicide, which I think it does in some countries, that's not a valid law, because I'm not violating anyone's rights when I commit suicide. Likewise, if I underwent surgery and I had a chip put in my brain that gave you direct control over me, or it made it impossible for me to run away, that would be legitimate. But it's not because it's a contract. It's because it's a psychological fact. I have actually rendered my will unable. I've made it impossible for me to run away from you. Right? If I make it impossible for me to run away, then no one's violating my rights. If basically I make it to where my mind cannot not consent anymore to what you're doing, that would be fine. So zombicide or some kind of technological slavery would be fine, but it wouldn't be because you transferred your rights. It would just be you gave actual physical control to someone.
Well, wait a second. If I put something in your head, I'm trespassing. The only way I can legitimately put something in your head is if you give me permission to do so.
Correct. No, I'm saying
let me just finish my
okay,
point.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you.
No, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. Go ahead. Keep going.
If I put a chip in your head, I'm engaged in an assault and battery. If you allow me to put a chip in your head that now takes away control of you so you can't run away from Bill Gates, well, you've just given up the argument. You said that was legitimate, but that's all I need. So I think the debate is over. You just conceded that my side is correct.
Well, in my view, if I consent to having something put in my brain that makes it impossible for me to change my mind, then that means I never say no to you. It's the saying no that's the problem. So if you try to use force against me and I say no, I'm objecting to that. I'm not consenting to it. It's just like the girl on the date. If she consents ahead of time, then the guy can kiss her. But if she changes her mind, now it's assault and battery. But if I somehow render myself where it's impossible for me to say no, then I'm actually complying with your orders all the time. You're not violating my rights, but there's no law that is saying I have to do that. It's what I've done to myself. I think it would be stupid to do that. It'd be like even worse than, sex change or something. It's some kind of horrible mutilation of my psyche. But maybe it's no worse than committing suicide, which I also have the right to do. I don't think that proves that you have that if I don't undergo this procedure and I change my mind, that you have the right to use force against me.
Could I
Well,
just ask, sorry, just I don't mean to interrupt, just to interject, could I just ask a question for clarity's sake? Would it be a case of saying, Stephan, just to clarify your point, is it a case of saying, like, you know, if you agree to this change in your psyche, so you can't change your mind, then you basically establish some terms for implicit consent going forward, and the only way to break that implicit consent is with explicit consent in the opposite, or explicitly revoking the consent, like with the girl on the date. If she never turns around and says to the guy, I don't want you kissing me anymore, then she hasn't overridden the implicit consent. Is that kind of where your argument's coming from?
I mean, I'm imagining in my head some kind of hypothetical that Walter would glom onto, some kind of zombie side argument. But yeah, basically you're somehow psychologically or physically making it impossible for yourself to actually change your mind. And so there's never a point in time where so once you say, yes, I'm going to be your slave and I'll do what you say, and then you can't object anymore because you've made it impossible. It's like cutting your tongue out, but in a deeper way. You've made it impossible to say no now. But it's physical. It's not by law.
I regard that as a concession that Stephan has given up his view because he's just said that for 50 million to save his son, he would allow Bill Gates to put something in his head such that Bill Gates could order him around and he could never change. Well, he's given up the argument. And he never explicitly answered my question about his son. He said, yes, he'd be sad that the libertarian law, as he understands it, means that his son dies. Well, I regard that as a refutation.
What's the question? I'll answer it. What exactly is the question?
We don't want our sons to. Let me just finish my point, Stephan. We don't want libertarianism to mean the end of our sons, who we love more than we love our freedom. And I think it's an utter and total refutation of Stephan's point that he concedes that his son will die and that my son will die under these God forbid situations. I regard that as a total refutation, and Stephan just sort of sloughs it off and says, well, okay, my son dies, you know, I'm a libertarian first. No, we don't want any sons to die. And certainly we don't want any sons to die when we value their lives more than our freedom. And libertarianism shouldn't be a straitjacket. Libertarianism shouldn't be a suicide pact for our sons. And yet the way Stephan is making it out to be, his son dies. I mean, that's just, I had a full head of hair before I started this debate. Look at me now. I pulled out all my hair over this. I'm kidding, of course, but I regard this as a total refutation. And Stephan sort of blasé, well, okay, his son's going to die, and that's not libertarianism for me.
I guess I don't understand. I don't see what the argument is. Are you saying that in addition to rights and justice, now our value is coming up with a system where our sons can live in a far-fetched scenario?
I say if our sons can't live in this far-fetched scenario, libertarianism is in trouble. And therefore libertarianism is wrong. And look, we as Austrian economists know that all voluntary trades are mutually beneficial. Here's a mutually beneficial trade. I give my person to Stephan Kinsella, to Bill Gates, and because I value my son's life more than my freedom, and he values my servitude more than the 50 million. And all of a sudden, you know, this is sort of like Kamala Harris wants to what do you call it? Forbid certain trades. Well, this is preposterous. This is not libertarianism. Libertarianism allows all trades, and I don't care about the will. It doesn't have to be zombicide. You don't have to put something in there. When you run away from, when I run away from Bill Gates's plantation, I'm stealing his property. And you say, well, it's a circular argument, and I say it's a circular argument the other way. And I didn't promise to be a slave. What I did is I conveyed myself for 50 million, and I don't want the 50 million back. Bill Gates might say, "Okay, Walter, you don't want to be my slave. Give me the 50 million." Well, the 50 million is already sunk into my son's life. But even if I had it, I don't want the 50 million. I want my son's life. And without that 50 million, he can't live. Look, I think we're repeating ourselves a bit, and we're running out almost of an hour. I promised an hour for this. Maybe Matthew, you could say a few words.
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, I've got two questions for both of you, which might at least help clarify each positions, and then perhaps we can kind of wrap things up with. I don't expect either of you to change each other's minds, but one of the things I really thought would be beneficial about this is exploring the reasons behind both of your arguments and getting into the kind of contract theory and the principle itself. I've got two questions. I don't know where to start. I'll start with you, Walter. I've got two questions for you. One is with employment contract, because an employment contract is kind of similar to what we're talking about with regards to making a promise and all the rest of it. But we don't hold, like if I quit my job where say I promised to work for someone for a year, but I decide to quit after 2 months, I might give up my right to whatever their side of the contract is with regards to compensation and stuff like that. They might not pay me my week owed or whatever. But the fact of the matter is they wouldn't, I assume you wouldn't say they'd have the right to enslave me on the employment contract. So what would be the difference for you in those two scenarios of a standard employment contract versus a voluntary slavery one?
Well, whether it's specified or not, remember, we had that specific performance contract. I now am hiring you as a host mother. Look, there are 57 sexes, so you could be a host mother. Look, Arnold Schwarzenegger got pregnant, so men can get in one of his movies. So you can get pregnant. You're the host mother, and you can't quit in the middle because you've got a baby inside of you. With the specific performance contract, yes. If we specify in advance that if you just can't leave in the middle of my performance, you got to keep holding that net until I get back down. Otherwise, it's employment at will. I hire you as a plumber in the middle of the job you quit. Okay, what the heck? So it just depends upon what you specify in the employment contract. If you specify no quitting, well, then you shouldn't be able to quit. Otherwise, what's the point of a contract if you don't adhere to the specifications of the contract?
Okay. One other question I've got to you for Stephan as well. One more question for you, Walter, is regarding the consequential side of it. Like one of the consequences you listed of obviously taking Stephan's approach is that means you won't be able to save your son in the hypothetical scenario because he knows that he can't hold you to the voluntary slavery contract and therefore you won't be able to initiate it, etc. But is there not also a consequence on the flip side from your point of view where, for example, let's take the date example that Stephan gave, and let's say the lady's actually written out a contract. I'm going to have sex with you at the end of this day, but then she wants to bail out of that. Would we potentially be sanctioning rape if we say, well, no, you agreed in advance to this contract and you can't back out of it? Because I think, and I don't want to speak for Stephan, but I think his point about the zombification thing is, your implicit consent that's attached to the contract, or just because that's how your relationship works or whatever, is null and void as soon as they explicitly revoke it, which obviously, if they were doing that with whether it's the slavery contract or the agreement to have sex with you at the end of the night, is again, I'd like to know where you see that difference in the distinction.
Look, I go to a prostitute and I pay her $100 to have sex. And right before the act is consummated, she says, I don't want to do it. And I think if I insisted, I'd be raping her. I think I can only insist, well, give me the $100 back. On the other hand, and there is another hand. Suppose I pay her $1,000, not 100, and let's say that the ordinary price is 100. I pay her 1,000, and I say, look, I'm paying the extra 900. One of the 100 is for the sex, and the other 900 is that you can't change your mind. And she agrees. Well, then it's not rape.
Jesus.
Okay, Stephan, before you respond to that, I've got two questions for you, and then I'll let you guys sort of just kind of do your final arguments to wrap it up. One argument I've got for you, Stephan, is in
Let
whether
me
it's
let me just add
sorry, go
one
on.
thing.
Yeah,
The
please.
reason I'm paying her $900 extra is because I'm going to die unless I have sex.
Okay, we'll throw that into that. Before you respond to that, Stefan, I just want to ask: do you see, with a contract breaking, do you see any aggression there? So, like for example, I'm not saying that you obviously take Walter's position that, for example, you've screwed Bill Gates out of you that he rightfully owns, but would you say that you have screwed, like you've aggressed in the sense of robbing him of the money that you took, say, under false pretenses or under terms that you're no longer fulfilling? Would that be aggression in your mind in that sense?
I don't see why you assume it's under false pretenses. Why would you? Because that would be a different assumption. But no, the answer is no. I think if you fail to, let's make a simple case. If I transfer future title to something, future money, like you loan me money now, and I agree to repay you a similar amount of money plus it's the same amount of money plus interest in the future. There's no false pretenses. This is an exchange between two people. It's a legal and an economic exchange. Legally, because it's a transfer of ownership, and economically, because of the economic reason that we're engaging in this transaction. But what there is there in the present time when the agreement is made, there's a one-way transfer of title of a present good, that is the current money, that's transferred to the borrower 100% completely. It's unconditional. It's not conditional as Rothbard and Walter believe. The reason it's unconditional is because I have to own it in order to spend it. I can't spend it if I'm not the owner. So I'm the owner of this present money, 100% the owner. And if I spend it, I'm doing something that's within my rights because I now own the money. In exchange for getting that present title, I transferred to the lender a future sum of money. That future sum of money doesn't exist yet. It's a future thing. It's an uncertain thing because the future is uncertain. And the lender is well aware of this. So what's happening here is that there's an exchange of a present good for an uncertain future good. This is always done in the law. It's called the sale of a hope. You can do this. And when the future moment arrives and the borrower fails to repay the lender, the creditor, if he doesn't have any money, then he's not stealing anything because there's nothing to steal. It's impossible to steal a non-existent thing. If he does have money and he refuses, if he does have money, now that money becomes the ownership. It's the property of the lender, but it's in the possession of the borrower, and he has to turn it over. And if he doesn't turn it over, he's detaining or stealing someone else's property. But if he's penniless and bankrupt, he's not stealing anything because there's nothing to steal. So, and contracts can deal with this by having a set of conditional title transfers that say something like, well, and if you don't have the money on the due date, then in the future, when you obtain other property or resources, you have to pay me out of that property with interest. I mean, you could have a conditional set of conditional title transfers. And by the way, this is how the law works right now. Under the law does not enforce specific performance almost ever because it's considered to be a type of slavery, and it probably would violate the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. So courts never award specific performance. They don't order someone to do something. What they do is they say you're in breach of contract, and now there's damages for that breach of that promise. That's the theory is wrong, but that's what the courts say. They say that you have a contract which is based upon a binding promise, and you breached it by not fulfilling your promise, and therefore we're going to make you pay money damages to the other guy to make him whole. So in the end, it works out to be a transfer of title to money. But if the guy that's in breach of contract has no money, the court can't make him pay damages to the other guy because he doesn't have anything, and they're not going to put him in debtor's prison. So there's nothing you can do. Sometimes you make a bet and you lose. This is a known risk ahead of time.
Is it a case of basically saying that you're simply making an unfulfillable promise with regards to kind of selling yourself? Because and just again, I just want to sort of clarify. So, like for example, in the Bill Gates selling myself to Bill Gates thing to save my son example, and he gives me 50 million. Like obviously, I know that Walter's saying, "Well, you owe him yourself, and you've stolen, that property from him." But what about what I know? Obviously, you reject that argument, but what about the argument of saying, "Okay, well, you haven't stole yourself, but you have stole the 50 million." Would that be fair to say that you owe him the 50 million back at least?
Well, okay, so let's take that example. So first, let's understand something that most people don't. In an employment contract that you mentioned earlier, that's really not. In economic terms, it's an exchange, but in legal terms, it's only a one-way title transfer. It's a transfer of money owned by the employer to the employee, conditioned upon the employee doing certain actions that satisfies. So there's only one title transfer, right? So the contract, as you call it, is just the employer says, if you do certain actions, I will pay you money. That's all that is. In the Bill Gates example, so let me take another example. Let's suppose I have a box. It's a box, and I say, Walter, if you give me your apple, I will give you this box, and whatever's inside the box, you own it. But I'm not going to tell you what's inside of it. It may be nothing. It may be an orange. It may be a gold diamond ring. Now, Walter is entitled to give me his apple in exchange for me giving him this box, right? And then when he opens the box, whatever's in it, he owns it. It might be nothing, right? On the other, and that's a legitimate contract. That's called a sale of a hope, something like that. Walter funds my fishing expedition, and in return, I say, I'll give you half of whatever I catch. I go out, I catch nothing, Walter gets nothing. No fraud. Say again? What's that?
I get half.
I get half of nothing. Now, if I tell Walter, I want you to give me $1,000. In exchange, I'm going to sell you the moon. Now, assuming Walter's not an idiot, we both are aware that I don't own the moon. So how should the law treat that contract? Is it null and void? Is Walter just doing something stupid as a way to give me money for free? I don't know. It depends on the party's intent. But that would be an impossibility. Now, in this case, if Bill Gates pays me money in exchange for me saying, in exchange for you giving me money, I'm going to mouth certain words and thereby make myself your slave under a legal system that doesn't recognize slavery, then he's aware that him giving me the money is in exchange for basically nothing, because there is no legal right for me to sell myself into slavery under this legal system. I don't know why he would do that. And I don't know whether I have to return the money. I guess it depends upon our implicit understanding about I mean, maybe he's a visitor from another land, and in his land there's voluntary slavery, and he's in my home country. He's not aware that there's voluntary slavery is not permitted in my country, and I tell him, pay me the money, and then I'll be your slave, and don't worry, it's enforceable. I guess that could be a type of misrepresentation or fraud. I'd be taking his money by trick, in a sense. So that's a type of fraud. I would be taking his money without his informed consent. So in the hypothetical, it depends upon the circumstances. I'm assuming Bill Gates, as a billionaire, can hire his own lawyers and figure out whether or not my promise would be enforceable, and presumably he would know that it's not. So if he gives me the money, I would probably characterize it as a gift. Like, I don't know why else would he would do it if he knows that it's not enforceable. Okay. But it wouldn't be theft. I mean, if he hands it to me voluntarily, knowing that this agreement is unenforceable, it's not theft on my part. Now, by the way, in Walter's example of the prostitute, I don't know why you made the extra $900 part of the deal, because you've already admitted someone could be a slave if they just alienate their body. So I don't see why a prostitute can't be a slave for an hour for $100. I mean, what's the difference? So you could rape her just like the guy can beat his slave. I see no difference whatsoever in those examples.
Go on, sorry, Walter, I'll let you respond to that, and then also if you want to do your kind of wrap up as well. I know we're kind of getting towards, we've gone over 60 minutes, we're getting towards the 90 minutes as well that Stephan didn't want to go over. So yeah, if you want to respond to that and then kind of give your kind of final argument, and then obviously Stephan can respond to you after that.
Well, Stephan went first, so shouldn't I be going last?
Yeah, well, you can go again afterwards, but I'll let you just sort of, okay, yeah, so you respond to that, give your little thing, then Stephan,
well,
and then I'll let you have the last word. Yeah.
I'll be done. You can finish up, Walter. You can finish up now.
Okay. I think an ordinary case of $100 for the prostitute, if I insisted I would be raping her because it's not specified that she has to do it. It's more of a tentative thing. Whereas if I paid the extra 900 and I specified that there's no backsies and that you got to go through with this, because if you don't give me sex, I'm going to die, and that's why I'm willing to pay this, well, then I think it wouldn't be rape if I insisted. I'd like to end with two more reductios. First of all, what happened at debtor's prison? Debtor's prison is a libertarian thing. I think even Murray, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether Murray agrees with debtor's prison, but I certainly agree with debtor's prison. If Stephan lends me $1,000 and I contractually I'm obligated to pay him $1,100 in a year from now with a 10% interest, and I'm penniless, I go to jail and I work at hard labor until I pay that $1,100, not the 1,000, the 1,100. So I think debtor's prison is compatible with libertarianism. My last reductio is Stephan is now in favor of rent control. Why is Stephan in favor of rent control? Because I think that if I own an apartment, I should be able to charge whatever damn rent I want. And when the government says that I can't charge whatever rent that I want, to that extent, I'm not the full owner. Look, I now am offering this pen for $1 million. And should it be illegal? Well, if I can't do it, then I don't really own the pen. And then I would say that if I can't sell myself, along with Wittgenstein and Norman Malcolm, well, then to that extent, I am a lesser owner of myself than if I can sell myself. And I insist on this business of the beloved son dying as it's not a saleable part of libertarianism, and I don't think it's a proper part of libertarianism, because if you really fully own yourself, you ought to be able to sell yourself, and if you really own a gun, you ought to be able to shoot it. Obviously not at someone else, but if you can't shoot it, then to that extent you don't own it. And this to me seems like a very basic libertarian philosophy 101, and Stephan and I disagree on that. All I can say is that I revere Stephan as a legal theorist, as a libertarian theorist, and I'm delighted to have had this discussion. And I'm hoping that this discussion, other people will take it from here and work on this and maybe surprise the both of us.
I want you to have the last word, but would you mind if I mentioned something for people to read following up?
Sure.
For people interested in this, read my chapters 9, 10, and 11 in my book. Discuss this explicitly.
Say the title of your book, Stephan.
Legal Foundations of a Free Society. Chapters 9, 10, and 11 deal with this. And I have a new article coming out. It will be on my website shortly. It's sort of an expanded version of this title transfer of contract stuff, which goes into this too. So those 4 things. And just to your point, Walter, Rothbard did admit in his contract theory article that debtor's prison in principle was legitimate, but that it would be disproportionate. So no. So he sort of said, yes, it's implicit theft, but it would be disproportionate punishment. So he sort of waffled on it, I believe.
Well, thanks for inviting us. Speaking in behalf of both Stephan and myself, I'm sure Stephan and I can agree that Matthew did a magnificent job.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate both of you taking the time to have this debate. I really enjoyed it. That time went by so quickly. There's so much food for thought there. I'll put links for, well, both of your work, for Walter's work and Stephan's work. And for anyone listening, regardless of who you agree on this particular subject, I highly recommend you check out both these people's work. You are not a well-read libertarian if you haven't read both of these people. So I would highly recommend you do that. In particular, obviously, Stephan's work, which literally does obviously deal with this particular subject. But both Walter and Stephan have written on this. So I'll put links to their work. And thank you very much, both of you, for taking the time to have this debate. It was very, very enlightening. Thank you very much.
Take care.